Hello, everyone. You're probably aware that the new Joker movie came out recently. You might not be aware that another movie with some similarities, but also some very important differences, also came out at the same time called Cuck. And I've seen both movies, so I thought it would be interesting to do a video comparing and contrasting the two. I will be spoiling both movies a little bit, not extremely, although I will say that I don't think either movie really suffers from spoilers, because if you've seen the trailers for the movies, that's pretty much what you're gonna get. And of course, it turns out I'm not the only one who noticed the similarities, and this article in The Guardian, I've seen people kind of throw this headline around, but I'm not sure many people have read through it. The beginning of the article kind of shows how the two are similar. The article's titled, "Forget Joker, here's the film you should see about an extremist loner." And it's written by Charles Bramesco. This was published on October 4th. And he writes, "This weekend, a film about an unstable loner pushed to the edge by an uncaring society comes to theaters. This figure, a virginal loser whose only female contact comes from tenderly sponge bathing his elderly shut-in mother, feels like he's been cheated by a world out of order. He exudes rage outward in every direction, to the girl next door failing to reciprocate his crush, to the absentee father leaving him without a role model, to the celebrity idol he worships until he ends up the butt of their joke. With nothing to lose and a heart full of hatred, the angry white man finally snaps, smearing on some face paint and going on a shocking rampage of gunfire. For all its extreme subject matter, this film has captured one particularly toxic dimension of the national attitude, a vitally relevant work of popular art for better and for worse. I am referring, of course, to Rob Lambert's new motion picture Cuck. What's that? They made another Joker movie? The similarities between Lambert's vision of alt-right virulence and Todd Phillips' much-discussed take on the famed foe of Batman are so numerous and specific that one would almost certainly seem like a rip-off of the other if the films hadn't been produced concurrently. They're joined in an objective to burrow into the pathologies of an extremist, to take a close look and discover what drives a seemingly ordinary person to extraordinary violence. Many critics have deemed Phillips' film a failure in its chosen creative mission, generally on charges of inadvertently glorifying the character it's supposed to be critiquing. What luck, then, that this week's cinematic offerings would also yield an illustrative counterexample to Joker's crucial missteps. Lambert's film makes its point by delving deeper into toxicity and committing to the most unattractive parts of itself. He's willing to put his money where his mouth is, and the result is more repellent, honest, and astute than this week's odds-on box office champion. All of the similarities that he listed here, they actually are accurate of both films, and it actually is creepy to go through and list them all. They are kind of like the same skeleton of a movie, but fleshed out in very different ways. Now, this writer is correct that many critics had some nasty things to say about the movie Joker. The reason he gives here is that they're claiming that it has glorified the character, which is obviously a very ridiculous claim. I'm not the first or last person to point that out. But, it's totally non-unique to the Joker, right? You could make this claim of any work of art that features a villain. And, people like villains. A likable villain is kind of the second most important thing that a superhero needs after their power, right? So that's a completely ludicrous and disingenuous charge. Now, Upper Echelon Gaming, their channel has a video that was recently uploaded called "Why the Media Needed Joker to Fail," and I thought that they actually really hit the nail on the head. So I'll link to that video in the description, and I am going to be piggybacking off of their conclusion a little bit. And, basically the conclusion is that the reason the media wants this movie to fail, they want it to either fail in the box office, which obviously that's not happening, or they want some sort of a violent outburst. And the reason for that is that they need this narrative to be true. They need this narrative that going to see this movie is going to have, that Anita Sarkeesian style effect, right? That Jack Thompson effect, right? They need that effect to occur so that they can be vindicated in their criticism of it. The real reason that they don't like the movie is because it's showing a mirror to themselves. It's showing how a lot of people along every step of the way are not fully, but to a degree, partially culpable for helping to create this monster. And the idea of having a story centered on a white male with mental problems that eventually snaps is that the culpability really does fall squarely with progressives and with SJWs who promote these anti-white, anti-male narratives. So they need some sort of failure of this movie. They need nobody to care about it, they need no one to talk about it, or they need some sort of a violent uprising to occur so that they can say that, that there's nothing to it, right? And that's the real takeaway from the film that they don't want you to see or to recognize. Now, the movie that they'd prefer that we look to for our messaging is Cuck. And the reason is that in Cuck, the subject of it, he's not treated with any kind of respect at all. The point of Cuck is to portray a character and to just pile on to the character every single thing they don't like about that person. It's an incredibly self-indulgent and vapid film, but it is a spectacle in its own right and a truly unique sort of film. What's very interesting though is that in this article, one of the parallels that they touched upon had to do with him living with his mother, right? This is the case with both Joker as well as with Cuck. Now, the person writing this article has framed it as this is the only female contact he has, right? And of course this is because he's just brought it up as a fleeting example. He doesn't want to focus too much on this. But just like in the case of virtually all serial killers, the real serial killer is the mother. And what's interesting about the movie Cuck is that it actually is more direct in its portrayal of the mother's contribution to the situation. You actually see her being duplicitous, being dishonest, abusing the authorities in order to basically keep her son under control. And that was one thing that was actually done very well in Cuck, though I imagine that virtually the entire group of people who would see that movie and watch it and take it at a face value are going to completely miss that. Now in Joker, female evil is of course the real culprit in the end, and they need to hide it. This was something that Stefan Molyneux had pointed out. The entire series of events in Joker, as well as in Cuck, are basically predetermined, and the events that determined the eventual outcome in both of these plot lines all occurred long before the events of either movie start, and it's with single mother female abuse. In the case of Cuck, I'm not sure if they ever clarify. I think it's his father died in the war, so she's technically a widow. But in Joker, this was a case of single motherhood, of just irresponsible, crazy women being abusive and being insane. The most striking contrast between the two films, and this would be the number one reason I suggest seeing both of them, is that in Joker you have a humanizing tale, right? It doesn't glorify the Joker, but it certainly does give him a human face, and you see how things develop, and there's a lot of logic to it. In Cuck, you're given the opposite. He's completely denigrated. He's completely dehumanized. And really, they're kind of an inversion of each other, right? In Joker, he's a human up until the end when he becomes a monster. In Cuck, he's a monster the entire film, and it's not until the very end of it when they show a video that he had recorded beforehand that you kind of have this tinge of, oh, like, that was kind of sad, right? They have absolutely, like, completely inverted emotional landscapes, which is a really fascinating, I think, kind of accidental thing that happened. But what strikes me is that we're constantly called upon to look at things from the perspective of our monsters, right? Whenever somebody commits a crime, we always think, well, you have to think about the circumstances. Think about what led them to do that, right? I think there's a series out now, which is like Why Women Murder, right? A very, I imagine very sympathetic sort of a take on it. Like, well, look at these murderous women, but let's talk about why they did it, right? And then, it comes to black crime, right? It's like, well, here's all of the economic factors that lead this to happen, right? You need to be more sympathetic. Yet, as soon as we do this with a character that's like a white male, somehow that's off limits, right? Somehow, the only purpose of that could be to somehow condone terrorism. Now, when you look at Cuck, it really is just the character being used as a punching bag. They seem to go out of their way to make him ugly, to make him not likable. And they don't really take any care to logically connect what he's seeing with the problems in his life. It's merely just, he's in this, the alt-right pipeline, to use the dumb phrase that Caleb, I guess, coined, him or his handlers, I'm not sure who, that he's stuck in that sort of a culture, and then all of these things are just scapegoats. Whereas in Joker, you can see how there's direct things happening in his life that are kind of adding up, and that, people, when they're in a circumstance where maybe they have a chance to intervene or do something very positive, that those opportunities are all missed. And what's very interesting about Joker is he does end up, with this kind of cult following, this sort of gang of people surrounding him, right? But there's very clearly a disconnect. It's very obvious, at least to me, that all of these people in the film Joker who are wearing the masks, who are rioting, who are celebrating the murders that he's committed just out of their vapid class-based hatred, he's not politically interested. You could argue that maybe he's only stating that or just joking, but I think that you can take the character at his word there. That's my interpretation anyway. It's that he's kind of reveling in the chaos, and all of these people who are his supporters by the end, they're just part of that chaos and just another tool that he can use. Which is very different, right, from like Jared Leto's Joker, where somehow he's supposed to be believable as this like leader and organizing person. In Joker, it's much more realistic because it just kind of forms around him. And, that sort of vapid, socialist, class-based hatred that's depicted in the film, I think that's one thing that's really being criticized, is look how easy it is to rally these people into a mob and look at them, celebrate murder. Now, in Cuck, where you finally get the humanizing element toward the end is that he eventually meets, like, his favorite YouTuber, right? They have a conversation. His YouTuber friend finds, eventually, the videos that were recorded, which, the subject of the film didn't think were being posted on the internet. And then, they go, oh, this guy's just a shill or a mole. He's a literal cuck, right? And that's kind of the snapping point, right? That's the last thing where, he thought he had a little bit of positivity, but then is kind of eaten alive by his own. But, I think that the kind of person who really likes the movie Cuck and is watching it to take at face value, I don't think that they're really looking at it in that human way. I think that what they want is a character that's basically just an effigy. They want to burn it. They want to beat it up. They enjoy seeing it. It's just one big, long fail video. And I think that it really exposes the hypocrisy of people, particularly leftists, particularly progressives, who love to talk about society and how society is the most important thing that needs to be changed, and how we need to be more sensitive to the ways that people, don't really control all of their circumstances. And here they are just making this ridiculous caricature of the people they don't like and beating it up and laughing at it and setting it on fire. And they're going to turn around later and they're going to talk about how it's people on the other side of the aisle who are full of hatred and who are the real people who seek to dehumanize others. I also want to note, Joker only says the N-word on Twitter, but in Cuck, he says the N-word like 5 or 6 times. So that's one reason to see Cuck. Those are the basic thoughts I had about it. Overall, I'd say both films are worth seeing. You certainly won't be bored. Joker was a very good film. I'm no critic, but I thought it was pretty good. I'm not sure if it's like a number one masterpiece. I kind of felt like it was very kind of obvious, the whole thing. I get that comes off as a little more harsh than I intended, but overall I'd say it's a very good movie. Obviously though, there's a lot of hype around it, and I do think that it's the commentary surrounding these films that is really what makes them interesting. Anyway, if you've seen one or both of these movies, or if you haven't seen them, if you have any thoughts or responses to this, comments are always appreciated, and everyone have a nice day.